The F-82 Twin Mustang is one of the most unusual aircraft in the American tech tree for War Thunder. Let's check it out. The North American F-82 Twin Mustang started off as a project at the end of World War II to build an escort fighter with a longer range than the conventional P-51 Mustang could provide, as the P-51 was currently serving in that role. The idea being that heavy bombing missions over the Japanese home islands might require longer-range escorts than were currently available. The aircraft was called the XP-82, and the first prototype got off to a bit of a rocky start. At first, problems with the slipstream from the propellers prevented the XP-82 from even getting off of the ground, as the center wing section wasn't providing enough lift. Once that problem was fixed, the flight testing was able to begin in earnest. There were initially some doubts about the future need for the plane, even though its flight performance was pretty good, as jet fighters were on the immediate horizon. However, as the Cold War got started, planners soon realized that they might need an escort fighter with enough range to fly into the Soviet Union from bases in Western Europe. This gave the Twin Mustang, now redesignated as the F-82, a new lease on life and a new role both as a bomber interceptor and as a long-range escort fighter. Several versions were built, including the F-82E, long-range escort, and the F-82F, radar-equipped night fighter. The plane saw some use during the Korean War and managed to shoot down some North Korean aircraft. After they were replaced in the air superiority role over Korea by newer jet fighters like the F-84 and the F-86, the plane was transitioned to a ground attack role and saw extensive use both as a close air support aircraft and as a strike-capable escort fighter for more conventional bombers. By the end of the Korean War, the Twin Mustang had shot down at least 4 North Korean aircraft, with 3 F-82s known or suspected lost in air combat. After this, they were transitioned to cold weather patrol fighters and served with the Alaskan Air Command until 1953. In total, about 270 Twin Mustangs were built. What we get in War Thunder is the F-82E Twin Mustang, an interceptor in the American Air Tree at rank 4 with a battle rating of 5.0. The base armament for the plane is a set of 6 M3 machine guns in the center wing section, which give the aircraft very accurate fire concentrated on the center line without needing to worry about convergence angles or anything like that. The ammo belts it gets are the standard mid-tier American 50 caliber options, and my usual preference for these are just the solid tracer belts. The F-82 can take external loadouts, which include 2 bombs of varying sizes, 10 high-velocity aerial rockets, or a gun pod. The high-velocity aerial rockets are pretty inaccurate, but they do have a rather respectable warhead, and they're generally effective for attacking lighter-medium ground targets if you can use them in a salvo or get lucky with an individual hit. The real king, though, is the gun pod. This thing adds an additional 8 Browning machine guns to the center line, giving the plane a combined cyclic rate of over 250 rounds per second and a burst mass of over 12 kilograms per second. At rank 4, battle rating 5.0. Just insane. The F-82's flight performance is an odd mix between a single and double-engined fighter. It has a really good rate of roll at most airspeeds, it climbs well, but it doesn't pull very hard into turns, and it's especially sluggish at lower airspeeds. Try to keep your speed above around 300 kilometers an hour if at all possible, as your control surfaces are going to work best when you're going faster, and they probably won't lock up on you unless you pull into a pretty good dive. Now, the big thing that this plane has going for it is speed. At its BR, the F-82E is one of the faster fighters, and it can outrun most of the other superprops if it needs to. The catch is that it just isn't a dogfighter. It wants to be, and you want it to be, but it's not. Now in arcade battles, the flight model's a bit more forgiving, and you can get into dogfights with a bit less risk. But in realistic battles, your best bet if you get engaged by single-engined turn fighters is just to punch the throttle and go into a shallow dive to try and just disengage. The plane has combat flaps that can be deployed safely a bit over 600 kilometers an hour, but you'll lose energy really quick, so be careful on that. One final note, if you take the gun pod and you go crazy holding down the trigger, and trust me, I know that it's tempting and you really want to, the recoil and the back pressure from the guns will actually slow the plane down a bit. It's not as bad as an A-10 or something, but it's bad enough that you'll probably notice, so just keep an eye on your speed as you're, unloading the fire hose. Flying the twin Mustang out in missions isn't quite as flexible as I'd normally like, but really that's fine with this plane. In air battles, I'm going to make this really simple. Get the gun pod, and fire hose the general direction of anything you can get close to. The offensive forward firepower of the F-82 with the gun pod is totally inappropriate, and the volume of ammo that you're dumping out will do incredible damage to anything you can tag. Forget the rockets, forget the bombs, forget ground targets, just take the gun pod and sweep the skies. What I usually try to do is to side climb out at the start of a match and look for bombers, then just go for targets of opportunity after I've reached altitude. You can play the twin Mustang as kind of a vulture, and since it's classed as an interceptor, it gets an air spawn in realistic battles, so it ends up working relatively well with that playstyle. Now you can fly this out as close air support too, and honestly, it can be a lot of fun. Depending on what you can get for spawn points, you can try going in with the unguided rockets, and honestly, they're not bad if you can actually get hits with them. Or if you want, you can go out with a pair of bombs and just, try and hit tanks the normal way. Now, the ground target belt for the gun pod isn't as brutal as you might hope. Remember, even with the quantity of shots, these are still just 50 caliber machine guns, so the armor pen of the individual shots is crap, even if you're vomiting hundreds of them at a time. Still, if you can find any lighter vehicles, or just get the jump on some AAA or something like that, the gun pod will earn its pay. But against tanks, my advice is the bombs. Visually, the twin Mustang is pretty distinct. It has the same clean lines and well-finished look as the regular P-51, but twice as much of it. The paint jobs aren't anything super special, but overall, I think the F-82 is a pretty good-looking plane. And it's relatively unique, with only a very small number of similar twin fuselage layout fighters being in the game. Landing the F-82 is refreshingly simple. The plane is one of the few with a quad landing gear arrangement, with 2 wheels up front and 1 under each of the twin tails. Flaps and gear can safely be dropped at around 250 kilometers an hour, and the plane has enough rearward weight to jam up the brakes without really having, too much risk of tipping over the nose. Overall, it's pretty simple to land the twin Mustang. Now, the cockpit will look familiar to anyone who's flown a P-51, but you've got a buddy off on the right-hand side of your view. The visibility's still pretty good for the most part, and overall, it's not a bad cockpit. To close out on the North American F-82E twin Mustang. This plane has good engine power and respectable top-end speed for its BR. Its weapon package provides totally uncalled-for levels of concentrated firepower right on the center line. It absorbs damage better than you might expect, and it can do okay in close air support. However, it's really not a great turn fighter, and its overall performance gets really sluggish at lower speeds. The final verdict on the F-82E is that this plane is an incredibly effective interceptor, and anything unlucky enough to get out in front of it is basically just gone. If you can master the cat-and-mouse disengagement tactics along with managing the plane's airspeed, the twin Mustang will deliver some major punishment to the other team. As always, thanks for watching.